Grootendorst.
Grooten means good.
Kind of. Like think more than good. What's better than good?
Great.
Great. Okay, so there we are. And Dorst, you have a facility in Germanic kind of languages. So it means great thirst.
Great.
And so, like, what could be more appropriate than someone who's requested an espresso before he begins his talk?
Otherwise, like, don't be very animated performance of God is what it is.
Anyway, I'm pleased to introduce Paul today. He's very kind to giving us rounds. Paul used to be my neighbor when we were over at Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy in exactly the next room. He is an associate professor at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy, associate editor of Health Economics, past president, Canadian Health Economics Association fellow, WHO Collaborating Center for various things, faculty associate for the Canadian Center. I don't really see anything about THETA on this website, but just, I mean, you are
invited to THETA? I mean,
you are a THETA investigator. Did you not know that?
Mm-hmm.
You are. Look on our website. You're listed.
I did not know that.
Yes. So now you can put it.
I'm part of the club.
You are. You are part of the club.
Excuse me, I'm going to have somebody.
As a sign of your welcome to the club.
I asked for a coffee, not a shooter. Thank you so much. That's perfect.
Okay. So Paul is an econometrician, a PhD in health economics, a very accomplished technical economist, and does drug stuff, drug policy, drug outcomes. So Paul, take it away.
Thank you so much for the very warm introduction. Can everyone see me on the internet?
Actually, 30 people, yes.
Oh, 30 people.
That's a big number.
Mommy. Okay, so wow, that really adds a little bit of pressure since I have a web audience. Does this thing work? So the talk today, to those of you in the room and those of you who are remote observers, is the impact of patented drug price controls on drug launches. Evidence from the OECD countries. OECD being a club of higher income countries. There's about 30 of them. The agenda is to talk about the general approaches countries take to drug price regulation, the drug price regulation scheme and the drug price regulation scheme in Canada, the criticisms that have been leveled against the Canadian price regulatory scheme, reforms that have been proposed, competing views on the effects of the proposed reforms, and some of original evidence that I will be presenting today, which was done in collaboration with my PhD student, Oliver Spicer. Oliver may, in fact, be online, I'm not sure. Then I'm going to present some other data from comparison of drug launch delays with between Canada and Australia. Okay, so feel free to stop me. I gotta say, that is a beautiful screen. That is a phenomenal screen you got there. I'm thinking of having a man cave with this kind of screen in the basement. New PlayStation 5. The dream. So disclosures. Yeah, I tried my best, but nobody wanted to fund me for the study. Oliver is a part-time PhD student. He works full-time at a place called Astellas Pharmaceuticals, which is a branded drug company, innovator company. So they would have a stake in the outcome of this kind of work, although they didn't really fund it or influence it. And then my friend, Bill Dempster at 360 Public Affairs in Ottawa provided assistance with the interpretation of the new rules coming down the pipe. With that out of the way, let me launch into a very brief overview of the manner in which governments regulate the price of patented drugs. There's a variety of different methods being used in the world. The first is the International Price Referencing Scheme. What does international price referencing mean? It means, does anybody hear about this? You've all been around the block. You're not the babes in the woods I usually speak to. You know that it means that the price in a country I is going to be tied to the prices in other countries, right? So countries are always looking over their shoulders, seeing what their peer countries are paying, and they want to make sure they don't pay any more, or they want to pay some average perhaps, so the price is paid elsewhere. That's one option. The other option is the domestic price referencing, wherein a new drug has to have a price in, reasonably close to the price of existing therapies, if available. And then there's this whole business called economic appraisal. I keep hearing about this. The price is set so that what is called the ICER, or the additional cost per quality relative to a standard of care therapy, is at or close to the sort of maximum willing to pay threshold. Have you guys heard of this thing, this ICER thing? Okay. I'm just giving you a hard time. I actually know you know this more than I do. This is what you live and breathe. Okay, then there's also budget impact kind of constraints on price, in which if total spend on a drug exceeds a certain threshold, then the unit price gets dropped down. Okay, so that's how different countries do it. How does Canada do it? Well, they have a long-standing price regulatory body, a quasi-judicial agency in Ottawa, called the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, the PMPRB, established in 1987. Mitchell Levine is the current, you may have known Mitch from McMaster. He is the current board chairman. Their purview, well, includes the setting maximum ceiling prices for different therapeutic drugs. And they use both international and domestic price referencing, basically depending on the therapeutic novelty of a new drug that comes down, that's being introduced into the market. They have an assembly of expert clinical pharmacologists and experts who can make a decision or who can categorize new drugs into the level of innovativeness. Drugs are categorized into 4 levels. First of all, you have your breakthrough drugs. These are drugs that are first in class to treat a given health problem or a particular indication. Those are your breakthrough. Then you have your drugs which improve upon existing therapies substantially, moderately, or slight or no improvement.
Thank you.
This might be a line extension, for instance. If you come out with a once-a-day formulation, this was big back in the late 80s. You may recall diltiazem came out in a once-a-day formulation after it was available only in a multi-day dosing format. Okay. So let's talk a bit about the international and the domestic price tests, shall we? And by the way, are you enjoying yourself so far? We're having a good time? Yeah? Okay, so let's make sure. So the international price test, what Canada does is, for certain drugs, we'll talk about that in a second, they regulate the maximum price in Canada based on the prices of the same drug sold in different countries. These different countries are called the PMPRB 7. There are 7 of these countries: the US, the Swiss, the Germans, UK, France, Sweden, and Italy. Okay. There's a domestic price test, and that's based on the formulary prices of drugs within the same therapeutic category as the drug that's being introduced. So let's just take a look quickly at how these things work. So obviously, if you are a breakthrough drug, you're not going to have a domestic comparator, will you? By definition, you're first in class. So your price will be, your maximum price will be based on the median international price. So the median of the prices of the countries in which that drug is already sold. You see, so if it happens to be the case that Canada is last to launch of the 8, so all the other 7 launch first, then the price in Canada will be based on the median of the price in the PMPRB 7 countries. Okay. And then for less innovative drugs, the maximum price is based on some function of the international median price or the domestic, the price of existing therapies that are in the same therapeutic category. So for instance, and this has always surprised me why they do this, substantial improvement drugs, the price ceiling is higher of the international price, median international price, and the therapeutic class comparison price. So they're actually less binding, the prices are less binding on the drug that are substantial improvements compared to, see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. There's more constraint on the prices of breakthrough drugs.
What's the therapeutic class comparison?
This is the one where you get compared to your domestic, the drugs already sold in the market in Canada with sort of formularies. So if you're the next ACE inhibitor, you'd be comparing yourself to one of the 12 different ACE inhibitors available for sale. I think actually about 8 ACE inhibitors now. And there's an additional test that applies to all the drugs regardless of category, and that is the price in Canada can never be the highest internationally. Okay. Okay, so people have been complaining about the PMPRB setup for a while now. They've noted that the prices, the list prices in Canada, these have been rather high by international standards. Let's see who's been bellyaching recently. Right, this group of people who wrote in the CMAJ complaining, Zhang, Martin, and Naylor have been complaining that the prices are too high relative to our international peers. Now, why is that the case? Well, what happens is, or it happens to be the case that the US, the Swiss, and the German markets globally have amongst the highest prices of drugs, right? They just happen to have high prices. So, or high list prices anyway. So, if you are a breakthrough drug or a moderate, a substantial improvement drug, and you can compare it to these prices, you're going to have to be behind. You'll be the 4th highest, roughly, right? You'll basically be, the median means you'll be behind these 3 over here. So you're going to be in the upper tier pricing internationally. And yeah. Now, if you're being compared to in domestic therapeutic class test, those drugs will consist of drugs that at one time were themselves breakthrough drugs, presumably. So those prices will be elevated as well because of the price of the breakthroughs at the time breakthroughs came in would have been priced high. So the system is kind of rigged to give you high list prices. The question is this, but who actually pays the list prices? Who actually pays these? The answer is not too many people pay. It's like going to a hotel room and looking behind the door of your room, and you'll see a rack rate for the room. It's like you could be staying at the Motel 6 and it'd still be, $300 a night. That's a list price. Nobody pays list. Drug manufacturers will often enter into deals with drug payers, drug plans, and will give them a confidential rebate off the list price. So the question is, what are the actual prices being paid in Canada, and are they high relative to our international peers? Well, I suspect that our prices, our actual net of rebate prices, are still relatively high. Probably not crazy high, but they're probably above the OECD median. So I've heard people say that the public plans get rebates in the order of 25%. This has been floated around literature. It's become a bit of an urban myth, perhaps. If you keep repeating it, eventually people believe this fact. I'm not too sure. But private plans, though, will likely not get huge discounts because, as an example, Murray and I are covered by the University of Toronto Drug Plan. The University of Toronto Drug Plan covers every drug. So when the drug plan adjudicator, in our case, Green Shield, tries to get a break on the price of the drug, the manufacturer knows that there's lots of open formularies. Green Shield can't credibly threaten to exclude a new drug from the formulary in order to extract a big price discount. So I don't think they probably get some price discount, but there's not going to be a big one. So overall, I think I'm just guessing here, people keep this information pretty close to their chest, but I suspect we're getting less than a 20% overall rebate on prices. I suspect that other countries probably get overall prices which are lower than ours. Okay, so the PMPRB intends to overhaul the rules. They were okay with the criticism until Zhang, Martin, and Naylor had their paper, and then that was a straw that broke the camel's back. They said, hey, if those guys are complaining about our policies, we have to change. So they have a new, I'm just kidding, they probably wanted to do this for a while. They probably wanted to make these changes because they realized that over time that they were paying these high prices, and they have gone through all the processes to get these rules changed, which is a big deal. It's a lot of work. They intend to implement the new rules in July of next year. What are the rules? How are they changed? Well, the price ceiling is now going to be determined by three different things. First of all, forget the domestic class comparison. Every drug now will be subject to an international price test, like the PMPRB 7 price test, the median of prices of the PMPRB 7. But now we're going to rejig the basket, removing those two particularly high-price countries, the Swiss and the US countries, and add the low-price countries. Have you heard of Kazakhstan?
Yes.
Yes, Kazakhstan is not in there, but there is a country called like Belgium. They have lower prices, and Australia. And then they're going to try their hand. People at PMPRB are going to try their hand at applying a maximum cost per quality rule. They've heard a lot about this health technology assessment. They're going to start applying this to limit the prices of new drugs. And they're going to have further price cuts for high-cost drugs. Let me explain a bit more fulsomely. But before I do, I'm just going to track down my coffee. That's good. Thanks again. So, let's talk about the comparator countries. So, they chose these comparators to, in a way that will bring the median, that the median of prices will be closer to the OECD median price. It'll basically result in about a 20% price reduction across the board for all patented drugs. This is a reduction in list price. So if you were paying close to list, beforehand, right? If you're a private drug plan payer, UT, you'd be seeing a pretty good, you'll be saving money. All right. So let's take a look here. Here's all the OECD countries, and you might recognize some of your home countries for those of you who were not born in Canada. There's 32 of these countries, 31. Okay, so the red arrows are the countries that are currently in the comparison group that will be excluded, the US and the Swiss. The US has very, very high list prices, although a very elaborate system of discounts as well. And then the green, not the green, but the light blue countries are the countries that are current comparators in this international price test that will remain so after July of next year. So Germany will stay, Sweden, Italy, UK, and France will stay. And the dark blue countries are the countries that will be added. The Japan and the low price countries of Spain, Holland, Belgium, Norway, and Australia. Australian prices are, according to this data from the PMPRB, are roughly 26% below the Canadian prices. Okay, so the median of these countries here, the light blue and the dark blue, is roughly 0.8 of the. I should have explained to you as well that the height of the bar reflects the relative price, the average relative price of a patented drug in the foreign country to Canada. So one means they're equally priced. There's lots of that goes into this little calculation, but one means equal price. So Canada's at 1. US is roughly, their list prices are 3 times ours. Our friends in Turkey are getting a steal. They're only paying 1/3 the Canadian prices for the drugs they sell anyways. Okay, so we're going to have the first change will drop prices by roughly 20%. They're also going to apply these new factors, like these cost for quality and the budget impact thing, to new drugs that come online after July 2020. The cost for quality threshold will apply to high cost drugs that are for whom the annual treatment costs are at least 1/2 of per capita GDP, so GDP per capita in Canada is roughly $44,000, so make that $22,000. So you can imagine some drugs that cost on an annualized basis over $22,000. You can imagine drugs for Hep C, I guess, if they're still branded, Enbrel, drugs for autoimmune disorders, oncology therapies. There's a whole raft of drugs coming out that are expensive. Right, so the cost per quality constraint, I don't know exactly if this is the case because I read it from a third source. I'm not sure if it's correct. The regulatory impact analysis statement evidently said that the threshold, the amount of the government is willing to pay, or the amount that the PMPRB believes society is willing to pay for a quality gain is $35,000 for a conventional therapy. For therapies treating highly prevalent diseases, $50K for things like cancer, and then $150,000 for drugs that treat rare diseases. Okay, I have no idea how this is going to play out. I don't really know exactly how this will affect the price of, I don't know, depends on the price of the drugs that would have come out after July 2020. We don't know that. Okay, and these are going to be applied to these thresholds will be applied to the actual prices, which will be kept out of public view to be held in confidence. And then there's going to be a budget impact analysis. So if you have a blockbuster drug the equivalent of a, Lipitor or Ramipril, both of which were highly prescribed, commonly prescribed in Canada, then you will also face a market sales budget impact constraint. So they'll take the government will drop the price threshold by 10%. This is over and above whatever else other pricing constraints may apply. They'll take a 10% price haircut for every $10 million in sales over $20 million, up to a maximum impact of 50%. So these could have some, I think, substantive effects on drug pricing. So that, you can imagine drugs for which the culmination of all these factors, if it's a drug, all drugs will get the 20% haircut, but you can imagine drugs that will, be high annual cost, that will get hit by the cost for quality constraints, and then we also get by the budgeting impact constraint. You can have drugs for which there's been a substantive reduction in the actual price. Now, how will these reforms affect the system? Obviously, if you're a drug payer and your focus is on your total budget, you're going to be happy. If that's your primary focus, you're going to welcome these changes. I don't actually know the amount that will be saved, but I think it'll be at least $2 billion a year, because patented drug spending in Canada is at least $16 billion. And if you take a 20% haircut on $16 billion, you're at $3.2 billion anyways. But then it depends on the actual rebates and how they played out. So I'm not too sure exactly. I think around at least $2 billion a year. There are some costs, however. One of the costs is that there's less money going back to head office for R&D. Murray seems to be, for those of you who can't see Murray's face right now, he's looking skeptical. And I would agree, because we're a small country, I don't think our price cuts are going to have a material impact on the global R&D budget. It'll have some, but it'll be marginal effect. The bigger cost, I think, or the more substantive cost, is the likely delay into Canada of new drugs. The launching dates will be delayed. That may be a more substantive cost.
Why they will need it? What will be the most delayed?
What will be the most delayed?
Why will be like?
Why?
Yeah. What will contribute to the delay mostly?
Glad you asked. Let me give you the reasons. The literature has identified two reasons why there's going to be delays, or why there might be delays. I shouldn't say there will be. There might be delays. The first is the launch prioritization reason. Companies don't have the resources to launch on every possible market at the same time. They simply can't do it. They go in stages.
It's even happening now.
Hmm?
This is partially happening now too.
Yeah. This is about, I think this is what Aidan Hall has found in one of his papers in CMAJ. So you're going to prioritize your launches. If you have a constraint on where you can go, you can't go everywhere at once. You're going to prioritize launches based on the gross profits you realize in each market. Canada's gross profitability goes down because of the price cuts. Our launch priority will go down as well. Okay, so that's one potential reason for delays. The second reason is you get delays is companies' attempts to mitigate the impact of price referencing, international price referencing. You can imagine a situation where you have two countries. Country A is a large, rather profitable market, and country B is a smaller market, less profitable to the company. Now, suppose that country A, in an attempt to save money, introduces price referencing. So the price in country A is linked to the price of the drug in country B, or at least the publicly list price, the public list price in country B. Suppose that the list prices in country B are regulated downwards. There's now going to be a lower price in country B. What's the drug company going to do in response? Well, the company probably will delay the launch in country B because that will mitigate the price erosion that would happen. Because if they launch in country B, then the country A price will be the country B price. It'll be lower. That will reduce profit. So they rather have a high price in country A. They'll just keep the drug off country B for at least until they realize the peak savings they can, the peak sales they can from the drug in country A. And you see this all the time in EU, where there's lots of price referencing. That's why Portugal has pretty crappy drug access, because other countries look at other bigger countries look at the Portuguese prices when they price reference. Now, will this affect Canada? Hard to know. There's no large profitable country that references our prices. However, there's been talk. People have been talking about price referencing. Who has been talking? The US has been talking. There's been a movement afoot to, well, they've taken the form of either proposals to import or proposals to price reference. I think the importation talk has got more noise, but the price referencing is gathering some steam, I heard. So there's talk about linking in the public drug plans in the States, like Medicare Part D, linking the maximum prices allowed in Medicare Part D to public list prices in Canada. Now, if that happens, that will certainly affect things. Here, that'll certainly cause delays. Now, what are the different perspectives on the launch delays? I talked to you about the review from the literature, where they say you could have delays from either launch priority or a reason or for the price referencing mitigation. The federal government's view is that there's no problem, that lower drug prices has no material impact on launch delays. They apparently look at the evidence, but they haven't shared their analysis. But in all their media releases and in their public statements, they've said there's no evidence for delays when prices go down. Now, it could be the case that their evidence shows exactly that, because companies can, like I mentioned earlier, have been relying more heavily on price rebates to disguise the actual prices which have been paid. So if you can imagine a situation where companies have been harmonizing list prices to prevent price referencing, and then price discriminating by the choice of rebate given to each country, giving bigger rebates and poorer in less well-off jurisdictions. So what do we do? Well, we said, okay, well, let's take a look at the data. What does the recent data tell us about the impact of list prices in a country and their launch delays? What we did is estimated what is called a linear regression model. It's like a statistical model which Bassem can explain to you ad nauseum. He is now the expert, the guru in this area, having done his thesis. But what it attempts to do, basically, is decompose the variation in an outcome variable into the components due to various predictor variables, which in my case, the outcome variable is the fraction of drugs launched globally which are sold in a given country by a given date. As a function of the price ratio in that country, we described that price ratio earlier, and the market size, the population and GDP, and another variable I'll describe in a minute. So it tries to partial out the separate contributions of each of these variables on the outcome. So you can say, holding constant the impact of market size, like population GDP, what is the impact of a change in the list price in a country, right? That's what we're trying to get at, and see what might happen in Canada with the use of estimated models to predict what might happen in Canada should we lower our price. So here's the drug launch variable. This is produced by a group called MPDUIS. It's actually part of PMPRB, or they're affiliated with them anyways. This is it's a ratio. The denominator of the ratio is the number of drugs that were launched in a number of different countries over a period of time. The countries are the PMPRB 7 and Canada. Of all the drugs that were launched in these countries over the period of time from 2009 to 2015. So that's the basket of drugs. And then they look at, for each country in the OECD, what fraction of those drugs were launched or were available for sale by the end of 2016. So you get a sense of how the flow of new drugs into a country. Okay? Publicly available data from the MedInfo Watch series produced by the MPDUIS. Here's the data. You see a pretty good spread. You see the US being the dominant market. You know, of all the drugs, those drugs that were being launched globally, at least PMPRB 7 in Canada over this period of time, about 88% of those drugs ended up in the States by end of 2016. Conversely, our friends in New Zealand saw only 16% of those drugs being sold by the end of 2016. And Canada is sort of right above the OECD median, we have about 50%. Okay. The second variable I'm going to talk about is the price ratio variable. This is the weighted average of the ratios of country I to Canada drug prices, listed drug prices for these patented drugs in 2016. So you take, for each patented drug sold in both markets, you take the price ratio, they say the Swedish to the Canadian, yes? Well, I guess you have to take the exchange rate. There's an exchange rate conversion into US dollars, I suspect, using market exchange rates. And then what you do is you take a weighted average of those ratios, where the weights are the Canadian, based on the Canadian sales of those drugs. That's how the PMPRB does it, and they report that in their annual reports. So we have this graph here from the 2016 PMPRB annual report. You'll see the high prices in the United States, relatively low prices in Turkey and Portugal. All right. So they're, again, the Turks pay roughly 30%, 37% of the Canadian prices. So then we get into the market size variables in this linear regression. That is the measured using the population of the country and its per capita GDP, both of which I grabbed from a group out of Groningen University in Holland called, they're the Penn World Table Group, and they spend their days amassing and reconciling international statistics on income, GMP, GDP, worker productivity. That's their focus. I got their population and their GDP data from that group. Expenditure side, real GDP at chained purchasing power parity units measured in US dollars for country I in 2016. I prefer these data to the normally used World Bank data. And then the final variable I haven't talked about is EMMA. EMMA is equal to 1 if within the country I, there is a woman called Emma living. No, that's not it. It's equal to 1 if the drugs in country I are approved by the European Medicines Agency, the EMA. So, and equal to 0 otherwise. So within the EU group, plus some other countries that are joining in, like Norway, not technically part of the EU, but still joins the EMA. Once you get approved through the EMA for any one country in this group, you can sell you're authorized to sell in any other country. So the entry costs are amortized over the unit sales across the entire EMA. Compare that to New Zealand. If you want to enter the New Zealand market, you have to actually get approval in New Zealand. You have to submit the dossier to the New Zealand Health Authority to get regulatory approval to sell. So it's a higher unit cost of selling. So we control for that as well, since most of the OECD countries are from the European Union. Okay, so what do the results look like? And I apologize for this is really sloppy presentation style. I get that. I just wanted to show you my R squared. Very proud of it. It's 57%. Not bad for a cross-sectional data set, I must say. Right, so what I want to show you here, and look at these p-values, for Pete's sake. They're all less than 0.05. Isn't that, don't I get a round of applause? Nothing? Tough audience. Now I want to focus on the log price ratio. I used a linear log specification to ensure that the predictions were, well, to help ensure the predictions were in the 0 to 100 range, the same as the outcome variable. So a healthy looking estimate of that beta, the beta 1, the p-value, for the two-tailed test, if this equals 0, is 0.01, which Lucinate, I think, can appreciate. And, well, what does this mean? Let's not actually dwell on the regression output. Let's try to turn this into English. What we're going to do is evaluate the estimated model at two different price ratios, one being the status quo, where the price ratio is 1. We pay 100% of our prices right now. And then we're going to drop to 0.8, which will happen when we introduce the new basket of countries. And then we're going to find the predicted drug launch percentage, holding constant the other variables. So we're going to look at this difference over here. The beta 1 times the log price ratio to the 1 minus beta 1 log price ratio to 0.8. So you put log of 1 minus log of 0.8, log of 1 divided by 0.8, which is 0.23 times the coefficient estimate, the beta 1 estimate. You get 5.23, and that is roughly the absolute reduction in the fraction of drugs launched globally that will make it into Canada within the 8-year period. If we go to a more aggressive price reduction, I'll say 50% price reduction, then we will get roughly a 16% absolute reduction in the percent of drugs launched globally that will end up in Canada. So some evidence, I think it's pretty robust evidence, that there will be implications for launch delays if we do ahead a lot lower list prices. I get a little bit of sensitivity analysis here. One of the difficulties of doing this work is that you're using a cross-sectional data set to model the launches of drugs which accumulate over a period of 8 years, 2009 to 15. So I just changed. So you have to, for a cross-sectional data set, you have to set your covariance at a given year. So I changed the covariate values from 2016 to 15. So now refer to this 2015 population, 2015 GDP per capita, 2015 price ratio. What does that affect? Well, it has virtually no effect on the estimates. What if we use 2014 values? How does that affect the estimates? Slightly lower for the log price ratio estimate. But R squareds and the qualitative results are unchanged. Right? Similar magnitudes, similar statistical significance. What if we drop these outlier countries? The US is just an outlier in many ways in terms of its high list price and its fraction launch. New Zealand is also a bit strange in that it has a very low fraction launch, but it has strangely a high price, high price. Are you concerned that our results are being fed by simply the presence of these two observations? Well, let's drop them and see what happens. Again, results are surprisingly robust, even with that change in place. I don't have time to go through it, but if you change if you look at a shorter period of time, if you look at drugs that were launched in 2015, that makes it to Canada by 2016, or into different countries by 2016, you get a smaller effective price, but the effect still remains. If you do different data definitions, you get roughly this. You get, oddly enough, you get very similar results. Okay, one common reaction to the results I'm showing, or one, yes, I can imagine is common, is the so what factor. People who are suspicious say, well, why do we even care about drug launch delays? Aren't most drugs, new drugs, Me Too drugs? In which case, there's good substitutes for those drugs already on the market. Why do we even care about new drug launches? Well, there's two responses to that argument. Is that, yes, there are more Me Too drugs than there are breakthrough drugs, but these launch delays presumably wouldn't discriminate. You're going to get delays in both types of drugs. And presumably you do care about the availability of breakthrough drugs or drugs that offer substantial improvement. There's going to be fewer of these drugs than the Me Too drugs, right? But still could be important for some patient groups. And even if you think about the Me Too drugs, and why do we care about those? Well, even if they only offer negligible health improvement, the only way that they're going to get on the formulary is if what? To show it.
Maybe threshold?
Maybe the threshold? Or?
Yeah. If you have very little health gain, how do you achieve your maximum cost per quality target?
Drop the price.
You cut your price. So that would be welcome as well. You have lower price, lower price drugs available. So I'm not as jaundiced as some people are about the industry. I think it's still helpful to have some drug entry, even if it's a Me Too. Now, the final question I asked is, can we get a sense of the actual timing difference? Like, give me the actual days and months and weeks of delay. So if you look at Australia, Australia actually resembles, I think, I'm not sure exactly, this is more speculative work here. Australia resembles now what Canada will look like in July 2020 in respect of its pharmaceutical market. So, you know, they have roughly the same per capita GDP, where they're actually a bit higher, 48,000 to our 44,000. We have a slightly bigger population, 36 to 24.5. Roughly similar healthcare systems, rural healthcare spending is roughly the same. Similar demographics there. They have 60% of the population 65 and older. We have 17%. Their price ratio is 26% lower than ours. So you might say, well, let's look at Australia and see how companies list, how fast they list in Australia. So what I did is, well, what Oliver did is he assembled a list of all drugs that the PMPRB deems to be breakthrough drugs. And we haven't done yet the substantial improvement drugs. So we found all the drugs that were launched in Canada between 2008 and 18 and looked at the number of days difference in the respective regulatory approval dates, and then found that of the 21 drugs launched in Canada over this period of time, Australia was slower to launch in 12 of the 21, didn't launch at all 3 of the 21 breakthrough drugs, but actually was faster for 6 of 21. There's a drug called gal sulfates. I've never heard of this drug before, but the brand name is called Naglazyme. For some reason, Australia had that drug many years before us. Australia had the drug many years before Canada. So there is a little bit of evidence that in some cases, the Australians get their drug faster. That occurs in 6 of 21 drugs. In the remaining 15 of 21, they have to wait a bit longer. And the average delay for those that do get launched is about a year. 3 of drugs, the breakthrough drugs, have not yet been launched there. So these are sensory observations. So yeah, some evidence that there might be, I mean, we're still working on this analysis, but there is some evidence of delays in the order of a year, although there are some drugs that do get launched faster in Australia. So what have I told you in wrapping up? I told you that the PMPRB rules will likely cause some delays, contrary to what my analysis was contrary to the analysis that the Government of Canada performed. The actual effects this time are difficult to predict because we don't know exactly how those new factors, the maximum cost of quality and the budget impact constraints, price constraints, will affect the drugs that come out after July 2020. There's some evidence that some drugs are delayed by a year in Australia, but there's also some that are launched faster there for some reason, although those are a minority of drugs. And if there's, I think the situation will change dramatically if the US decides to actually externally price reference our Canadian drug prices. That concludes the formal part of my presentation. I'd be pleased to take questions.
I have 2 questions. You presented this as if, very nice talk, by the way. You presented this as if delay is a bad thing. And, you know, I mean, I think a lot of the narrative around this is getting patients access to innovative, potentially transformative drugs. That's the sort of usual narrative.
Yes.
The other narrative is, you know, like if you buy a car in the first year of its production, you're going to pay a price premium for novelty. You're going to inherit all the bugs of the drug, of the new car. People haven't maybe worked out all the safety issues. Is there some potential advantage in delaying? Well, maybe we'll find out all the adverse effects when it's been launched in, you know, in Australia and these various other places. Number one, is it a bad thing? And secondly, can you talk about the relationship between PMPRB and the Pan-Canadian Pricing Alliance? Because this is regulatory price. The prices that the provinces themselves pay are subject to a different negotiating mechanism.
Yes.
So can you just talk about, so those are my 2 questions.
Those are highly prescient questions. I mean, we have to, if you want to do a full-blown welfare theoretic analysis of the policies, then you would have to account for the learning by doing, the fact that it may be helpful to let other countries try the drug out first, in some cases to, especially the States, since they have a large population, to detect rare side effects. So certainly that would be a benefit of delay that you'd have to incorporate into a welfare, like a full-blown cost benefit. It depends also, that would be balanced again against the, well, it actually would be kind of a complicated analysis because you have, for instance, you have the Hep C drugs that have come out that have cured things, cured this actual, as I will tell you, it's actually eradicated the virus. So it depends on the degree of risk aversion in a full-blown case of cost benefit. It depends on the degree of risk aversion and your willingness to take it. Now, that depends presumably on the severity of the disease that you're treating, right? The more severe the disease, what is the cost of waiting another year?
But it's something that you could potentially do based on your analysis. You could think about what is the likelihood of delay, what is the actual delay, how many qualities are going to be lost because of the delay, how many are potentially going to be gained by avoiding all of the adverse side effects, and what's the effect on cost of delay. So it would be really interesting analysis to actually try to predict all of the health and economic consequences of a policy of delay.
Well, it certainly could be done ex post. I mean, we could reconvene a year from now and see what drugs have been launched globally, and then do empirically see, well, what fraction of those drugs, maybe 2 years from now, rather, what fraction of those drugs have actually shown to have defects that were not evident at the time of regulatory approval? What fraction were there, all these drugs obviously provided a substantive therapeutic improvement for those who affirmed it did work. Yeah, or you can do a sort of an ex ante analysis looking at, based on historical trends, what you might expect to come out of the pipe. But the drug development landscape has now changed so dramatically with the singular focus on biologic therapies, these higher priced therapies that you may not have the same track record of data to draw upon. So that is the answer to the first question. The answer to the second question is that, yes, I have focused entirely in my modeling on list prices and the impact of list prices. So, and you correctly pointed out that the PCPA negotiates these rebates in the form of these PLAs, these product listing agreements, which, so in the case of the public plans, I suspect that the list price reduction is not going to affect the prices that they pay, right? Because they probably already get the same 20% discount that will be realized when we apply that new basket of country test. So that's going to lower the, that will not make any difference. On the other hand, the application of these new pricing tests, these cost per quality, and these the budget impact test could presumably reduce the price, the net of rebate price paid by the public plans below what they're currently paying, which would presumably further exacerbate the delays. Because this is my analysis based entirely on public list price variation. I don't know much about what happens with the actual, what the delays look like with variation in the private, in the actual net rebate prices.
Okay, so we have questions from 2 people online.
Okay.
Mike Polden has 3 questions, and Stephen Punk has 1. So let's start. Mike Polden, very interesting presentation, Paul, thanks. I have a few questions. To what extent is Canada an outlier compared to other countries? According to your data, Canada has the 3rd highest prices, but in the mid-table, in terms of the number of new drugs launched, only 50%. So would the price reduction really reduce this figure much further? Would you want to take one question at a time?
Yeah, let's do it one at a time. I have very short memory. Probably my time.
Well, you're 5 minutes over, so we'll maybe just take 1 or 2 questions, and then I don't know.
Okay, well, yes, I mean, we're at 50% with high prices. I guess, Mike, my answer to the question is that if you believe my linear regression model, applies to each country, right? There's going to be an error term. So the error term will reflect idiosyncratic factors unique to each country, which could explain why we have 50% listing rate, yet a relatively high prices. There could be idiosyncratic effects in the error term, which, for which we have to be, well, that's going to affect the, would that affect the finding that of the, or the estimate of the beta 1, which is the effective price? Yeah, let me have to think about that. Actually, I think, so you could argue that there's no single impact of price on launch delay. So my model assumes that beta 1 doesn't vary by country. It's a sort of an average. It's an average effect across countries, and it's possible that this thing does in fact vary by countries. It's not a homogeneous effect. It varies. I'm looking at a relationship that describes the average behavior across countries. It's possible that there could be idiosyncratic effects of price reduction. But I don't think that what you pointed out necessarily is condemns the model, because yes, you're going to have some countries that have high list prices yet low uptake, like New Zealand. They have very low uptake of new drugs, yet their list price is very close to Canada's list price. So, and then you get another question.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe I'll take one question from Anne and then come back if we have time to the rest of the next question. Has the PMPRB officially outlined what these changes will be, or are they still deciding them?
Still deciding them. There's still some. They're going to roll out the final set of guidelines in the next few months.
Okay. Do we have more time?
I think, I'm going to let people go if they are, it's like 8 minutes after, and I don't like to keep people here who have very kind to come around. So let's thank Paul for his amazing presentation.